Okay. Our webinar is now live, and there are some people who might show up. A lot of people have signed up to get the video afterwards, but I'm going to go ahead and start right in and welcome y'all to this chat with Carole Boston Weatherford, where we will explore the parallels of Billie Holiday and Marylyn Monroe. Before I introduce Carole Weatherford and begin the conversation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Country Bookshop in downtown Southern Pines, North Carolina. We are unique in that we are a bookstore that is part of a small community, twice weekly, award-winning newspaper called The Pilot. We are a general bookstore for kids and adults that is part of a community that chooses to shop with us and share their stories and lives with us and celebrate lovely thinking and writing like Carole has given us in these two books that we will discuss today. I will post a link to buy the book below the video and in the chat, and also will direct you to Carole's website, which has fantastic resources for all of her books for teachers or book clubs if you want to dive deeper into these books yourself. Now, in case you do not know Carole Boston Weatherford or have not gotten the chance to check out her books, I will tell you a little bit about her before we begin. Like Eleanor Fagan or Billie Holiday, Carole was born in Baltimore. Since her literary debut with Juneteenth Jamboree in 1995, Carole's books have received 3 Caldecott Honors, 2 NAACP Image Awards, an SCBWI Golden Kite Award, a Coretta Scott King Author Honor, and many other honors. The New York Times bestselling author has released 2 books since the pandemic began: Beauty Mark, a verse novel of Marlyn Monroe, and RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. Her 50-plus books include the Caldecott Honor winners Freedom in Congo Square, Voice of Freedom, Franny Lou Hammer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement, and Moses, when Harriet Tubman led her people to freedom. She won a Coretta Scott King Author Honor for Becoming Billie Holiday, the other book we will be discussing today, NAACP Image Awards for Moses and for Gordon Parks, How the Photographer Captured Black and White America, the Arnold Adolph Poetry Award for the legendary Miss Lena Horne, and an SCBWI Golden Kite and WNDB Walter Award for Stromberg, the man who built a library. Among her most popular titles are Freedom on the Menu, The Greensboro Sit-ins, and my personal favorite, The Roots of Rap, 16 Bars on the 4 Pillars of Hip Hop, which you were able to visit us for at the Country Bookshop. Carole has received 2 of North Carolina's highest civilian honors: the Reagan Rubin Award from North Carolina English Teachers Association and the North Carolina Literature Award. She holds an MA in Publications Design from the University of Baltimore and an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She is a professor of English at Fayetteville State University. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Kimberly, for that introduction, and thank you, Country Bookshop, for hosting me today. And actually, I learned something. Even though I've been to your bookstore several times, and even visited local schools through appearances that the bookstore arranged, I never knew that the bookstore was affiliated with the newspaper. So
Yeah,
I learned something today.
It's something we're really proud of. About 10 years ago, the store was about to close and the newspaper bought it. And it's a great partnership for getting the word out about books and conversations like this one. This conversation, I want to thank you on a personal level for the excuse to dive into these 2 books. And my first question, Billie Holiday and Marylyn Monroe, their biographies are so reductionist, and the way you've explored them in these 2 fictional memoirs and poetry examines them in such a different way. Why was that important to you?
When I write about figures like this, particularly for the young adult audience, this is a little different with picture books, but for the young adult audience, I always want to write about women in the way that they might want to be remembered. So Billie Holiday, would not want to be remembered for firing heroin into her veins.
No.
yeah, she would want to be remembered for her love of music, her love of life, and her love of people. And Marilyn Monroe would not necessarily want to be remembered as, she didn't want to be known as a blonde bimbo. She wanted to be, she was, much more intellectual and actually exercised much more agency in her life, in her real life, than her on-screen persona would suggest.
It comes through. You mentioned her intellectual identity, and you have one poem that is kind of going to be one of my favorite poems. It's now up there, but where you open with an Emily and close with Emily Dickinson quotes and list her books.
Right.
Which
I like to do list poems, and so she had quite an extensive library of more than 400 volumes. And she read Emily Dickinson. She read Rilke's poetry. She read Freud. She read Ralph Ellison. She just had this intellectual curiosity that belied this other, her on-screen persona. She only had a high school education. She didn't have a high school diploma. She went to about 10th grade. And Billie Holiday just had a grade school education. And she read pulp magazines like True Romance and True Confessions, that kind of thing.
Well, you list those as well. I mean, you list some of the titles, and I love it. There's something, it brings you so close to them. But explore so many parallels, their education, where they stop. But in the afterword to your Billie Holiday book, you talk about the vast, to quote you, vast emotive capability of Billie Holiday. And I mean, I was wondering if you could talk to that, because both of them, they have these like bright, shining selves that come through.
Yeah. Well, Billie Holiday, came alive on stage, even though she had this very small voice that, quite frankly, would not have even made her a famous singer had it not been for the invention of the microphone. She needed the microphone, but she had a voice that musicians said sounded like a horn. And she was able to she was a song stylist extraordinaire. She was not the best singer, like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, could probably out-sing Billie Holiday, but no one could out-emote Billie Holiday with a song. And Marilyn, had this on-screen presence that just, radiated, not only radiated movie star, but radiated this, this magnetic personality. And she was a comedian, and she was able to, carry her lines in such a way and use her body in such a way that she really did, embody the parts that she played and the moments that she was on stage, on screen.
You have a poem talking about or I guess it's the last stanza, where you talk about the microphone for Billie Holiday. And as I was reading that and thinking about the camera for Marylyn Monroe and the microphone for Billie Holiday, these two inventions without which they couldn't necessarily be who they were.
Right, exactly. As I said, Billie Holiday, her voice would not have carried, over a nightclub crowd, certainly not Carnegie Hall, without a microphone. And Marilyn, even before she was on screen, was a print model. She, was in cheesecake photos. She tried, she did some fashion as well, but she wasn't really tall enough at 5'4" to be a fashion model. So she, was kind of relegated to these cheesecake photos, pinup photos. But she studied the camera, the lighting, and how to pose. So she really had mastered that even before she had her screen test and got on the big screen.
You talk about timing, Billie, in the Billie Holiday book. You talk about how she's just behind. Can you
singing? Oh, Billie Holiday sang just behind the beat. So, the beat would come on, and then Billie would, then her voice would go in. And then she also had this way of extending her voice beyond the beat and kind of bending notes. And that was, how she infused her songs with emotion by bending these notes, by coming in, just behind the beat. And as you said, just impeccable timing. And then, Marilyn had this impeccable comic timing that came through in movies like Some Like It Hot. So
You talk you
very talented women who studied but were largely self-taught. Like Billie studied, not formally, but Billie studied piano players. They were her, that's how she got her musical education. And of course, Marilyn studied the camera, and she studied method acting with Strasberg.
These two books, there's not a conversation that we could have that could explain my joy at reading them and how you explain these women. So I'm thinking other places I want to dive in, to go to the basic parallels, talking about their childhood and if you could talk to that for a little bit, and their fathers, and then I'll dive into all my crazy questions for you.
Neither of their mothers married their fathers. And so both Marilyn and Billie just ached for, this father figure in their lives. Billie did know her father, but her mother and father never lived together. And she never knew, which version of her father she was going to get when she saw him. Like, she encountered him one time when she was older. She needed some money to help pay the rent. Her mom, I think, was ill, and this is before Billie became famous. And she went to this club, and her father really didn't want her there because he didn't want his good time girls to know that he had a daughter who was as old as Billie. And so he gave her the money, but he kind of rushed her out of the club. But she didn't really. What she wanted more than the money was for him to acknowledge that he was her father and to treat her like his daughter. Now, for Marilyn's part, her father, she never met her father at all. She did try, but she never was able to meet him. Her mother was mentally ill. Billie's mother worked as a maid, so she was as a live-in maid for white families in the Baltimore area. So she had to get other people to care for Billie. So she would meet with neighbors, with family, distant relatives, whoever would keep the child for a while. And but Marilyn's mother was mentally ill, and her mother, her grandmother, actually made her mother turn Marilyn over to the Bollanders, they were Marilyn's first foster family. And one of Marilyn's earliest memories are of an incident when her mom wanted her back and came to get her and stuffed her in a duffel bag, military duffel bag. And the foster mother and the birth mother fought over Marilyn, and Marilyn fell out of the bag on the ground.
Billie's mother, yes, she had to have all these other people take care of her, but she came through as such a strong supporter to me in her life. When she was raped, borrowing money to get the lawyer, fighting to get her out of that reform school. And then when they moved up to Harlem, it's just this backbeat to the whole second half of the book, that her mother was there, her mother was there.
Yeah, but her mother really didn't know how to navigate the system. As many people didn't, and as many people still don't. Her mother did not know how to, her mother had a limited education. She was African American during the Jim Crow era, and she didn't really know how to navigate the system either. And because of her job, and also her own desire to have a man in her life, sometimes when Billie was pawned off on other people, it's because her mother was chasing a man. So she was she did what she could, but she was no ideal mother. They were Catholic, and they had fish on Fridays, and they went to mass, but her mother was no saint.
You talk about the Jim Crow era, and so many of your poems are about Billie touring specifically. I mean, so much about living with those laws and segregation, but specifically it comes to light in her touring. Can you talk a little bit about some of those poems and in that part of?
Sure. When Billie was the first African American to tour with an all-white big band. She toured with Artie Shaw's orchestra, or big band, as it might have been called back then. And there was because Artie Shaw knew that there were going to be problems as they toured. He also had a white female singer who toured named Helen Forrest, and she was to be Billie's understudy at places that decided, no, we can't have a Black woman on stage. So Helen Forrest would take Billie's place, if the promoters, if the promoters or the theater owners or whoever the sponsor was balked about having this Black woman on stage with the white band. But one time they went to a boarding school, I think somewhere in New England, and evidently the headmaster declared that no. Helen Forrest thought, okay, this is not, we don't want Billie on stage. So they said, okay, we'll have Helen Forrest. And the headmaster said, oh, no, we mean no women on stage, period. It was an all boys school. So neither one of them got to sing. When Billie toured with the all Black Count Basie big band, they got to Detroit, and the theater owner there said that Billie needed to put on dark makeup, something that Lena Horne also had to contend with in movies or on screen, because Billie was light skinned, and the theater owner was afraid that people might think that Billie was a white singer singing with an all Black band.
That, when I read that in the poem, it didn't surprise me just because of what I've studied, what I have read about that time, but it's still, I think that's the first time I was aware of that. And that section of poems really, all of your poems bring Billie to life in such a way, bring the internal dialogue forward in such an amazing way. But those specifically stood out to me. And I think as teachers kind of consider using these books in their classroom, I think there's so much in both of them to study and unpack. And you have a poem about Marilyn and Ella Fitzgerald as well.
Oh, right. Yeah, that is, one thing I do not know is if Billie and Marilyn ever met. I haven't found any proof of that. I have to think that if Marilyn was in New York and going to jazz clubs, that she probably saw Billie Holiday, at least, from the audience at some point. But I have no way of knowing that either. But I do know that they had Ella Fitzgerald in common, and both of them admired Ella Fitzgerald and her singing style. And although Billie and Marilyn were, of course, Billie and Ella were contemporaries. Marilyn was maybe 10 years younger. And, so Billie and Ella would have been on some of the same stages, maybe on some of the same bills. But when Ella was touring out west, she wanted to appear at the Macombo Club, which is an exclusive nightclub in LA. Marilyn had studied Ella's songbook at the instruction of a vocal teacher who said, if you want to know how to sing, you listen to these songs, listen to Ella Fitzgerald. And so Marilyn had listened to Ella's music, hundreds of times as a student. And when she heard that Ella had been barred from appearing at the Macombo Club, not only because she was Black, but because she was heavyset. They had other Black people sing there, but they didn't like, they just didn't, women thing. Right, it was a woman thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is, pre-feminist, proto-feminist. And Marilyn went to the owner and told the owner that if you will book Ella, I will sit in the front row every night of her performance. And she did, and he did. So Ella sold out the Macombo Club, and after that, she never had to play small clubs again.
You talk about wondering if they met and hung out, which I really in my, fantasy dream world, they totally did. But
Mine too.
so you have a poem in each kind of referring to some lesbian love, which we can talk about. But do you know Gladys Bentley?
Yes.
Okay, in my
Bricktop, right? She went by Bricktop, right?
yes,
Bricktop, yeah.
and she was the cross-dressing Harlem piano player, and she would have crossed with Billie Holiday. So in my mind, as when I read that poem, the first thing that came to me, I was like, oh my gosh, what if she had a love affair with Gladys Bentley? And I sat there for 30 minutes just imagining Harlem and this scene. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The person she supposedly had an affair with was Tallulah Bankhead, the
Ooh.
actress, yeah. And in fact, she had put, Tallulah Bankhead was in Billie Holiday's autobiography, but Billie was asked to take that part out. So Tallulah was the one that she had the affair with. I know about Gladys Bentley. And Marilyn had an acting coach, and I forget her name.
Natasha,
right. And she and Natasha lived together, and it was said that they were living together as husband and wife. Natasha was, known to be a lesbian. So it's all just rumor. That was in a different time.
oh my God.
When people, did not feel comfortable with sharing their gender orientation. They were, more closeted people. Let's say that. I think I would assume back then.
I think so too. But also, as I was reading these and comparing them and thinking about all the ways these could be studied, I was kind of excited for so many young high schoolers to be able to have that window of experience in history that's not often talked about or known, and the opportunity to understand that in different ways and study it.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's the whole, mental illness and substance abuse part of it. Both women suffered from depression. Both women were survivors of child sexual abuse, and both women did, they met their ends through the substance abuse. And those, it's not uncommon for people who are survivors of child sexual abuse to fall to to have a substance abuse problem because the pain is so great.
Exactly. Just chase
they self-medicate. So yeah, the similarities, both of them were raped or molested by either neighbors or well, in Billie's case, it was a neighbor who was supposed to be babysitting while her mother was out. And
on Christmas Eve too.
Right. And I mean, can you imagine what that does to Christmas for a person? Yeah,
I did. When I read that, I was like, well.
Yeah. And for Marilyn, her mother had gone out on a date. And for Marilyn, it was a boarder at one of the foster homes. And of course, once she, and it was a foster home where she actually enjoyed staying. But, once this man did this to her and she told, she had to go. She had to go. She was deemed the guilty party.
Well, there's so much more I want to say about that as well. But it also came through in your books and in their lives, some good men that they were able to, that were a part of their lives. I think about Joe with Marilyn and Bobby Henderson. You have a line where you say, Bobby stood by me like a tree when she was telling people what was what. And that your words there, that image made me so happy for Billie Holiday. Can you talk a little bit about what the men they had in their lives were? Or
let's see. Well, Marilyn, I don't view, maybe the Henderson may have been the one of the good men that she had in her life. I'm not sure whether he was the guy from Montreal. Was that the one from Montreal?
I think he was the piano player who lived with them, right?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, but she also had an affair, was in love with a guy from Montreal, and I think due to the distance, and he was white, I'm assuming, and they did not, they could not continue the relationship. Marilyn, I don't think was quite as lucky as Billie was, in at least experiencing what quote unquote true love. She did marry. She was well. She had married first of all at age 16 to stay out of an orphanage. Other, her foster parent, her aunt Grace, was planning to move, and to avoid having Marilyn return to the orphanage, she suggested that Marilyn get married, and she married a
Jim.
neighbor's son. She married Jim Daughtry. And once she started her modeling career, she never was into the marriage, but once she started her modeling career and he wanted her to stop it and have a baby, she decided she was getting a divorce. Joe DiMaggio, definitely, definitely was probably the love of her life, or at least one of them. She was the love of his life. But what's not in Beauty Mark is that the evening after she did the photo shoot for 7 Year Itch above the subway grate for that iconic photo where her skirt is blown up, that he beat her. And that photo shoot was actually the end of the marriage. He was so embarrassed and so appalled that thousands of people had turned, the crowd, a crowd of thousands had witnessed this photo shoot, that he beat her. And they broke up after that.
It's interesting you don't include that in the book, because you do have poems about Billie Holiday, and it's Ben. And actually, and I don't even have this in my notes, but you have two lines where Ben was bad news and that I was slow to read. And that just.
Right. Yeah, because Billie Holiday supposedly wore the gardenia, started wearing the gardenia to hide bruises on her face. So yeah, and why did I leave that out of the Marilyn book? Because when you do this research, you always find out things after the fact.
Yeah.
But it's too late to include. And of course, it's not substantiated. It's just rumored that he beat her. But he did, he was very devoted when she was in the psychiatric hospital and wanting to get out. I guess she thought she was going to stay for a few days and, dragged on to 2 weeks. And Joe DiMaggio was the person who busted her out of the psychiatric ward. And he was also the one who put flowers on her grave until every week until the year that he died. And his very last words, I think, were, I'll finally see Marilyn again. Something to that effect.
And I wanted to ask you about that. At the end, you have a great afterword in Becoming Billie Holiday, but in Beauty Mark, you list some newspaper headlines.
Right.
Why? I mean, I find it fascinating.
As an epilogue, really.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike the Billie Holiday book, which ends like about halfway through her life, the Billie Holiday book ends right after she records her iconic song, her signature song, Strange Fruit. So she's only 24, 25 years old at that point, 24 years old at that point. Marilyn is at the end of her life. She's like 30, 35, 36, 35 when the book begins, when Beauty Mark begins. And at that point, she doesn't know it, but she only has about 3 more months to live. So I felt more of a need to tack an epilogue onto the action, because the book ends, the story ends actually not with the poem of the headline poem, but the story ends with her singing Happy Birthday to John Kennedy, the president. And all of the action really takes place in her head while she's backstage at Madison Square Garden in that dressing room for like 6 to 8 hours, being sewn into the dress the sequin dress that she was going to wear to sing Happy Birthday to him, because she was naked underneath and had to be sewn into this dress, which took hours. So what is she thinking about while she's standing there? She's thinking about how unlikely it was that a girl named Norma Jean Baker, who was a foster kid, could wind up singing Happy Birthday to the president. And so the last poem is meant to like tie up all the loose ends of those last 3 months of her life, that she, that she sang Happy Birthday. She got fired by her studio one last time. She was in the midst of shooting Something's Gotta Give. And she died of an overdose of sleeping pills, supposedly. That's the official story. But her story doesn't end there because her legend lived on. And people, even up to this day, people are claiming that she was on a UFO, and Joe DiMaggio was leaving flowers on her grave, and Hugh Hefner buys the crypt next to her so he can be buried next to her because, of course, who exploited her more than, he rose to fame on Marilyn's nude photograph.
I know. I mean, I only know because I read your book, but I had sold out Playboy first issue, buying those photos. Okay, we could talk about the structure of the Billie Holiday book, comparing the fact that they changed their names, the what Hollywood meant to each of them. There's so much, but what I want to go with that is the constant undervaluing of both of these women,
Right. And actually that's really the premise of each book. And the first poem in each book, really does talk about how they're undervalued. The premise of becoming Billie Holiday is that a 24-year-old Billie Holiday has just read a review in Time magazine of her song Strange Fruit when it was released in 1939. And the critic not only discussed the song, but he started off saying, well, she's fat and doesn't care about how she looks because she won't diet. And furthermore, she probably didn't really understand the song's lyrics and only chose the song because of its tune, not because of the powerful words, which were
the whole point of it.
Protest lynching, right? So he really he totally disrespected her. Marilyn, on the other hand, is in this dressing room in the first poem. She's thinking about, her journey from, foster kid to singing Happy Birthday for the President, and remembering that Hollywood's old guard had said, and in fact, it was Betty Davis, and I don't use these exact words in the book, that slut can't act her way out of a paper bag. And so Marilyn is saying, here I am getting ready to sing Happy Birthday to the President. What did they know about what I could do? So yeah, they were both, so undervalued and so disrespected as women.
It's part of why I think I'm so honored to shine a light on these two memoirs, fictional memoirs and poetry, because, and it's your talent, but just the medium of poetry that allows you to re-examine their lives in such a different way, and for us to be so present in the thinking behind them. Can you talk a little bit about the structure of your poems and Becoming Billie Holiday tied to the songs? And
Sure. I wish it were an original idea. But Billie Holiday had an autobiography, which she did not write herself. There was a ghostwriter, and she also claimed that she never read it either. But that autobiography is in chapters, and each chapter is titled after one of her songs. And I actually had forgotten that when I printed out, when I was doing the research, I printed out a discography, a list of the songs that she recorded. And what I would do when I get ready to compose a poem is, of course, do the research about a particular episode of her life. And then I'd look at the song list and try to choose a song title that was evocative of that episode. Now, the lyrics of the song didn't have to have anything to do with the episode from her life. But for example, the song, her birth poem is entitled Why Was I Born? So that was a song that she sang. And she was born because two teenagers met at a carnival and made a baby. So that's how I structured those. That's how I structured those poems. And there are two that are titled after films that she appeared in, rather than after her songs.
That first poem, the Why Was I Born, the way you approach that subject and the way you explain it, is consistent throughout both of the entire memoirs, fictional memoirs, is there's no shame attached. There's no judgment. That's what it is. There's no judgment. It's just, you're reading that and you're like, oh, these two teenagers had a ball. You know, it was one day off of work. And I love the way that you allow us to examine their lives without judgment and without shame, and with an ability to just deeply understand and think about them in different ways. Sorry to interrupt, but that poem.
I think that's important because during the time that they were growing up, there would have been so much shame attached to not having a father in the home, to being, born to people who were unmarried. There was, in fact, there was so much shame attached to Billie Holiday's birth that her mother left Baltimore. That's where her mother was born, and worked for a family in Philadelphia. So, and had the baby up there. So, she wouldn't have to be scrutinized by the family and by neighbors. So yeah, there would have been, a lot of shame attached to their upbringings at that time. But I wanted to, kind of depict it as they must have felt it.
One of the things that's also striking, and even more so when you paint this picture of what shame must have been surrounding them from other people's perceptions at the time, is what Hollywood meant, the dream, kind of you talk about Billie Holiday and Billy Dove, right, and going to those matinees, and Marilyn growing up, her guardian, the Jean Harlow. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, Billie Holiday used to scrub marble steps in Baltimore. There are row house. Baltimore is a city of row houses, and at one time, many of those row houses had marble steps. Some of them still do, and people took great pride in their stoops. And they would scrub them themselves. And Billie Holiday decided, she was going to, have a little business scrubbing marble stoops, and she did. And she saved her money, and she would use her money to go to the movies. And her favorite movie star was Billy Dove, who was a silent screen star, blonde, who had an affair with Howard Hughes, learned to fly airplanes herself. And just, she was popular for, she had her 15 minutes of fame during Hollywood's early years. And Billie Holiday took part of her name from Billy Dove. So that, that explains where Billie got her name. So movies were an escape for Billie Holiday, and also for Marilyn. Marilyn equated movies with Alice in Wonderland, not the movie Alice in Wonderland, but the book where Alice goes into this completely other parallel universe, which is Wonderland. And for Marilyn, the movies were Wonderland. And she idolized Jean Harlow because her Aunt Grace always told her that she looked like Jean Harlow, and she was going to be just like Jean Harlow, who was one of the early sex symbols of Hollywood's silent and early the talkie era.
You talk about these parallel universes and the names. You have poems about both their names, especially about Marylin having almost parallel people between Marlyn Monroe and her orphan deep self. Can you talk about their names and as we're talking about the parallels between them as they crafted the names and remade themselves, and what you write about?
That might be one that I could better address by sharing the poems themselves. Why don't I do that?
That would be lovely.
I'll start with, let me see, I got them. So Billie Holiday was born Eleanor Fagan, and this is entitled, But Not For Me. Introducing Eleanor Fagan, Eleanora and her Esquires, Eleanora and the Encore Orchestra, Nora and the New Yorkers, all wrong. Eleanor Fagan was fine for some bawdy barmaid or a factory worker right off the boat. fine for a striving domestic fresh from the cotton fields, but not for a blues mama, not for me. Eleanor Fagan had vaudeville written all over it. I needed a name to carry me from Harlem to Hollywood, to spark applause when MCs called me on stage, a name to light marquees. Bessie Smith was the empress, Mamie Smith the queen, titles earned by record sales, and I was an unknown. Eleanora, who? I needed a name that fit like a silk gown, a name to drape like a pearl mink stole across my shoulders. My daddy Clarence rarely gave me the time of day, so I took what I wanted, a hint of his name. The movie star Billy Dove, my idol, supplied the other half, a name equal parts tomboy and flirt. Billie Holiday, Miss Billie Holiday. Now that has an uptown swing. So Billie, had just started singing and needed a name, a stage name. And Marilyn needed a stage name too. And one thing I found out again after researching the book is that her first stage name was Carole.
Really?
Yes, I found that out maybe within the past few weeks. Don't ask me, Carole, what I can't remember.
That's just Marilyn nodding to you from the grave, you know.
I know. So this is called Living Up to My Name, and you'll hear some of the titles that were bestowed upon her by magazines and different fan groups. Living Up to My Name. I was born Norma Jean Mortensen, but suddenly I was box office gold with more titles than I could keep track of. Miss California Artichoke Queen, the most promising female newcomer, world film favorite, best young box office personality, Miss Morale of the Marine Corps, the present all GIs would like to find in their Christmas stocking, the girl most likely to thaw Alaska, the girl most wanted to examine, the girl they would most like to intercept, the most advertised girl in the world, the best friend a diamond ever had, the talk of Hollywood, a wonder of the world, the fastest rising star. The adoration was all hers, the accolades Marilyn's, not mine. In my mind's eye, I was the girl most likely to be found dead, clutching an empty pill bottle. In 1956, I made the name change official. The legal formality was less a rebirth than an erasure. She had eclipsed me. And so, Marilyn viewed, I think that Billie, integrated her stage persona more so than Marilyn did. Marilyn, she viewed Marilyn as a stage persona, as someone other than herself. And she was notoriously late. And one reason she explained for being late is it took her so long to get into this Marilyn persona. It took makeup, the hair. She wasn't even born blonde. She was born brunette. In some pictures you see, early pictures you see she's a strawberry blonde. It took convincing for her in the modeling industry for her to dye her hair initially. She changed her hairline, which changed her face shape. She had some plastic surgery on her chin, supposedly, and perhaps even on her nose. But she viewed Marilyn as someone other than herself. And someone who, really depleted who she was, because it took so much energy to be Marylyn Monroe. She was able to, when she moved to New York, she was able to move about with a scarf and sunglasses and, be anonymous. And she was able to go, many places. But then she said, but sometimes I took Marilyn to the theater. And so she would be in, she'd be dressed up and, as Marylyn Monroe. But it took a lot of energy to be Marylyn Monroe.
You have a great poem about her lateness and about this moving to New York. But before we read some more poems, can you talk a little bit about the structure of them? I am a bookseller and just get to appreciate poetry, and I do not often dive into, how they're written or what it means. Can you talk a little bit about can you teach me about your poem structure and all of that. I just appreciate it all.
Well, most of them are free verse.
Mhm.
There may be there are a couple rhyming poems in Beauty Mark. I'm not sure if there are any rhyming poems at all in Becoming Billie Holiday. But I wrote that in 2008. That's why my memory is foggy. But first of all, I chose poetry because I think both of these women lived lives which were themselves poems. And, there was so much emotion in both of their lives that I thought, well, poetry is my first literary language to begin with. I feel more at home when I'm writing poetry, but I thought that poetry was the genre to go with to tell their life stories because it so suited it suited the jazz and the blues that Billie sang, and it suited the emotional landscape of Marilyn's life. And she wrote poetry herself. That's another thing I found out in writing this book, that Marilyn wrote poetry. So the poems are free verse, but most importantly, they are written in first person. So they're written in the voices of Marylin, in the voices of Marlyn Monroe and of Billie Holiday. So they are telling their own stories through these poems that I have written.
It comes through in the intimacy that first person allows, and you're right, poetry is the correct language to capture all of the emotion, and I love, and I will include this, their lives were poems in of themselves. I'm wondering if you could.
And one thing I also think of each book as a one-woman show.
Yes.
So it's either, a one-woman show or it's a visit with that person. And that person is Marilyn is telling the reader her story, and Billie's telling the reader her story. Maybe she's whispering it. But they, I wanted the experience between the reader and the subject to be intimate.
It is, and it's, as I've gotten to really dwell in both of these shows in preparation for this conversation, just in terms of who I put these books, whose hands I put these books in, to try to get people to read them, it allows for such an intimate reading experience that is far beyond high school, the intended audience of high school students.
Definitely.
These are the coffee table books. This is what you put in your guest room. This is what you read, and then just have always around, so you can just dip in and jump into that one woman show with the poem. And we are closer to the end of our conversation than the beginnings. I was wondering if you could share a poem or two, maybe one for each before we close.
Let me see. I think I'm going to read the poem. There is a poem in each book about their natural gifts, and so I'm going to read one poem about each woman that refers to their natural gifts. And from Becoming Billie Holiday, I Got a Right to Sing the Blues, which, by the way, is one of my favorite songs by Billie Holiday. No one taught me to sing just behind the beat, to tease listeners with my tempo, to glide above the band, flit between musicians like a canary finally free. No one trained me to blow like a horn, to milk a measure by bending the melody, to breathe a universe in a single note and end a song in a different key. No one told me to bridge sound and feeling, to be a statue in the spotlight, gesturing with a nod of my head or a wave of my hand, to stand my ground and never bow. That came natural, baby. That all came natural. And from Marilyn, let's see what page is in. 67. Okay, this is about Marilyn's shoes, and I love shoes. So this is called The Physics of Ferragamos. It didn't take 40 pairs of 4-inch Ferragamo heels for me to figure out my famous wiggle, nor did it take cutting a ½ inch off one of each pair, as is rumored, to produce my signature sachet. Salvatore Ferragamo compared me to Venus, the Roman love goddess. He custom makes my size 6 stilettos with craftsmanship rivaling rocket science. But the wiggle is all mine, all Marilyn.
You you end another one of your poems with "The beauty mark is mine,"
Oh yeah, you
which
like that one. That was called The Secrets of Style. Do you want to hear that one?
I love that one.
It's on. Tell me what page it's on if you have it.
Let me see here. I kept wanting. It's towards the end. I know.
Yeah,
Kind of
it's a long one. Those 2 pages. Want me to just read part of it, or you want me to read the whole? I don't
read
know.
the whole thing. We're here to celebrate these books, and
Okay.
it's a great poem.
Secrets of Style. Swear off underpants. Trust neutrals, black, white, and beige. Reserve red, which the studios prefer for photo shoots, for when the occasion demands a showstopper. Shop at Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman, Bonwit Teller, or New York boutiques. Pour on crease-resistant silk jersey dresses that crumple in one hand and slide over curves like liquid. Look for these labels: Galanos, Lanvin, Emilio Pucci, Seal Chapman, and for footwear, Ferragamo. Collect little black dresses with distinctive necklines. Every now and then, flirt with eyelet and lace. Favor simplicity over the latest fashion. Forego fads. Don deep V necklines to create an illusion of height. Wrap up in leopard for a predatory edge. Use jewelry sparingly. Don't waste money on gemstones. Buy only costume jewelry. Let natural beauty shine. Apply a thin film of debut foundation in ivory medium. Set makeup with Laszlo's Duo Phase loose powder. Create contours, hollows, lifts, lines, and shadows that sharpen cheekbones and deepen eyes. Brush on rose blush for girlish innocence. Slather on Vaseline or Nivea to mend luster. Layer 5 kinds of lipstick and gloss for a plump pout. Paint darker reds in the corners, lighter in the center to add dimension, and shimmer on the Cupid's bow and bottom center. Pucker up in the mirror. Frame the visage with a platinum mane. Place marbles in bras or buttons inside dresses to fake nipples. Spritz on Chanel No. 5 and adjust the posture. Lift the shoulders, lengthen the back, tilt the head, and swing the hips to a beat. Surprise with wit. Seduce with smiles. My beauty mark is real.
I love that. Before I ask you to read one final poem, I want to ask you what it has been like for you to examine both of these women and compare them, and if there's anything in our conversation, any parallels or connections between the two that have struck you that we have not addressed.
Let's see. In terms of connections, well, one that I love and that I can relate to. One connection is that they both love dogs, and they began loving dogs when they were girls because they moved around so much. They didn't necessarily attach to friends as quickly, but they loved dogs. For Billie, it was like the neighborhood dogs, and Marilyn's family had a dog which got killed, and that was a very traumatic experience for her, and she actually had to go to live somewhere else as a result. And both of them had dogs as adults, and Billie, both of them also wanted very badly to be mothers. Marilyn, I think, had endometriosis or something like it that made her miscarry, so she had multiple miscarriages. Billie, I think, had an abortion very early. I'm not sure if she had miscarriages. but I do know that she was not able to conceive and also was barred from adopting because of her criminal record related to her drug abuse. And so she knitted and crocheted little outfits for this chihuahua that she had, because he was the recipient, the beneficiary of the mother's love, the mother love that she had nowhere else to project. So that I connected with in both of their lives. And I even found later on that after writing Becoming Billie Holiday, that later in life, Billie even had a beagle, and that's my favorite breed. I've always owned beagles. So in terms of the creative process, though, it was somewhat different because when I wrote Becoming Billie Holiday, I wasn't as conscious or aware of the fact that I was channeling this person. It wasn't until after I had written it that someone brought it up to me that I thought, I think I did, because I wrote the poem so quickly and it was almost as if Billie was whispering in my ear or humming. But yeah, with Marilyn, I was much more conscious of it. Therefore, when it came to the most difficult episode of her life, when she was committed to a psychiatric ward, I was afraid to approach that poem. And actually, even though I wrote everything in chronological order, I did not write that one in chronological order. I saved it for last because I was really afraid, because of this channeling thing, that I didn't want to get pulled into that low point with her.
I was almost surprised, and I shouldn't have been. I know the kind of reductionist Marylyn Monroe biography, but I was almost surprised to have it in there, because so much of both of these fictional memoirs, it's not that it's not addressed, but it's just the pills, it's all addressed, but the dark spaces aren't there. And it was it felt different as a reader. That it's interesting to know that that's how you wrote it, because it felt different to me than the other poems in that book.
And then I also have had mental illness in my family, so that may have had something to do with it as well. I approached that particular poem, much differently than I approached I approached it with fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that may be why it reads differently.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, this exploration, anyone who has gotten to the end of this video, I am overjoyed for you to have the experience of reading these books, entering into these two works of art, really, and celebrating a different way of thinking about these women. Oh, sorry. And I'm just excited for you to have this experience that Carole, you have given me and will give all of your readers. And I'm hoping you wouldn't mind closing by reading the first poem in the Billie Holiday book, which is so good.
And this poem is the one you don't mean Why Was I Born? You mean the other poem, the What Shall I Say?
Well, I mean, really, we can read whichever one you want to read.
I'll read. I think I'll read Why Was I Born, since we talked about that. Because Billie Holiday had. I'm sorry. Why was I born? Because Sadie had one day off a week from her job as a live-in maid, and crammed as many thrills as she could into the few hours she called her own. Because teenagers flocked to the carnival in July for rides, cotton candy, and sideshows. Because Clarence had rested his banjo for the evening, hoping to sneak a peek under the tent during the burlesque show. Because he and Sadie bumped into each other at the hot dog stand and shimmied all night long in the sultry summer air. Because Clarence whispered in Sadie's ear, sweet-talked his way right up her skirt. Because that one time was all it took for two dumb kids to make a baby. Because Sadie went to Philly with full belly to keep from shaming her Baltimore kin. Because I could not wait a minute longer to burst on the scene, and 2:30 a.m. April 7th, 1915 was as good a time as any to gasp my first breath, cry my first chord, 'cause I no more chose my folks than chose my name. Eleanor.
We have to end on that. My heart swells. Every poem is so lovely. And thank you. Thank all your children's books. If you're watching and are not familiar with all of Carole's work, check out our website because you can buy them there at the Country Bookshop. But thank you for this conversation and your work. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Country Bookshop, for hosting us.
Of course. Well, everyone have a lovely day. And Carole, I'll be in touch. And thank you all for watching and attending.